Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones. I appear to be suffering from some sort of cold that has made my voice go extremely croaky and deep, so today's voiceover will sound a little bit strange. Also, there's some people out the front doing digging with massive diggers and power tools, so hopefully that won't get in the way. Anyway, today is all about how to very, very slowly cultivate a fiction newsletter. This is part one. I'm going to do a follow-up probably next week. Writing fiction is hard. Finding readers is even harder. Achieving success, regardless of how you personally measure it, is near impossible. Near impossible. It used to be a lot harder, back when publishing was an all-or-nothing endeavour. These days, we have options. Over the last 3 years, I've stumbled my way through setting up a newsletter, and it's gone fairly well. Not life-changingly well, as with some of the off-the-charts subscription success stories we hear about, but well enough to make me a very satisfied writer. And let's face it, trying to follow tips from the super mega successful newsletters isn't always a good option because they're the weird outliers. It's impossible to replicate their path because it was a combination of unique factors, often including 20 plus years of prior professional success. So for some context, the kind of success I'm talking about is over the last 3 years, since summer 2021, I've grown my newsletter to 5,500 subscribers. And depending on where you're coming from, 5.5k subscribers might seem like a crazily, amazingly huge number, or it might seem rather piddling. That's how this goes, and why you shouldn't ever compare yourself to other people in this game. But this post is about how I've done it. Your mileage may vary, of course. Some of this won't fit what you want to do with your time and skills. Pick and choose what you find useful. Don't ever focus on growth, because that will just make you miserable. It will turn you into one of those people. Ultimately, do whatever makes you happy and helps you keep writing. Okay, so here we go. Let's get into some of these observations, tips, I don't know. This is things that I've noticed that have worked. So frequency. I send out 2 newsletters every week. On Mondays, I send a non-fiction piece, like the one you're listening to right now, which usually explores the nuts and bolts of writing serial fiction or publishing a newsletter. On Fridays, I send out a new chapter of my ongoing fiction serial, Tales from the Triverse. I've been sending out these 2 newsletters since the summer of 2021. Sending at least 1 newsletter per week was essential from the beginning. Any less, and I'd never gain traction, or lodge in the brains of readers. I wanted the newsletter to be a welcome part of people's lives, popping into their inboxes on a regular basis, such that readers would look forward to it every week. Doing more than 2 per week seemed like the wrong approach. In practical terms, it wouldn't really be possible. I simply can't produce that much material without the quality or my health suffering. But even aside from that, I think more than 2 newsletters per week starts to become intrusive and annoying and difficult for readers to keep up with, even if they're enjoying it. So 2 newsletters seemed like the sweet spot. Okay, next up, I want to talk about consistency. 2 newsletters per week only makes sense if I stick to that schedule. If I do 2 newsletters, then take a break and don't post again for a month, it'll confuse readers. Much like a TV show, it's important to meet audience expectations. Going dark for unpredictable periods makes it difficult for anyone to become enthusiastic about your writing, especially if you're a fiction writer. Non-fiction is perhaps less reliant on consistency, but if you're telling a story, readers need reliable, consistent delivery. It's what makes the difference between a one-off, that was useful, article, where a reader swings by for a single piece of information and leaves again, and a regular reader who actively looks forward to reading your next piece. That enthusiasm is directly related to familiarity. And even if your work is remarkable and groundbreaking, its delivery should be entirely predictable. The important exception here is if you do actually just need a break. Whatever the reason, if you need to hit pause, simply explain it to your readers, take some time, then come back when you said you would. Like taking a holiday from a day job, employees don't just vanish for days or weeks at a time, as that would be chaotic. Instead, we book specific holiday leave, and then everyone knows what's going on. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee before my voice box entirely falls out of my mouth. That's better. Well, maybe better. Okay, next up. Mix it up. So, this I suspect will be controversial and quite unpalatable to some of you, which is fine, but here's the thing. When I started here in 2021, I was starting more or less from scratch. Nobody knew who I was or whether it was worth reading my fiction. My newsletter was brand new, so there was no pre-existing audience to provide social proof. Attracting readers to fiction is very difficult because it's a hugely saturated market. There's an infinity of stories to read, many of them very, very good. Why would anyone bother to read a science fiction story by Simon K. Rando when they could go and read a genre classic or an award-winning modern novel? Sure, some people actively seek out the new and interesting and unexpected, but that's an even slower road. That's partly how I ended up with the other half of the newsletter, the non-fiction bit, like the piece you're listening to right now. It's the how-to and the journal and the magazine, and it has vastly more audience potential than the fiction. This is where I can share my experience and thoughts, hopefully in a helpful way, and answer questions other writers may have. I suspect most subscribers come for the non-fiction, but perhaps stay for the fiction. Critically, those two halves to the newsletter are not mutually exclusive, but are in fact tightly intertwined. There are a lot of gurus and snake oil salespeople and dodgy hybrid publishing companies trying to take advantage of fiction writers, most of which are united by a common attribute. They haven't actually written anything decent themselves. I don't want to be one of those internet guys spouting opinions and presenting them as wisdom. Hence, the fiction chapters that go out on a Friday serve as a kind of proof, evidencing that I know what I'm talking about. Or at the very least, it gives readers the opportunity to sense check what I'm saying. Like whether someone agrees that it's good proof or not is up to them, but it's there for people to check out. And in the reverse direction, fans of the stories get to go behind the curtain and find out how something like Tales from the Triverse gets made. It's a nice feedback loop. This is also why you won't find me talking much about paid subscriptions. My advice to date has focused very much on writing serials, on putting a newsletter together, on finding readers, and so on. All things that I can point to and demonstrate that I've walked the walk. Having anything useful to say about paid subs is something I'm only now getting towards, and I'll only write about that when I have something useful to say and which I can actually evidence and point to and go, look, I did this thing and it made sense. So this is a tricky one because a lot of you will just want to write some damned fiction without faffing about doing other non-fiction and journal-y stuff and some of the more promotional things in terms of how it feels, which is entirely fair enough. It will make it harder and slower to find readers if you just do fiction. But at the same time, you'll know those readers are 100% there for the fiction. The question I always have is how many of my readers are here for the non-fiction compared to the fiction. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter to me because I love doing both, and as long as it's resulting in me writing more, then I'm all good. Okay, next one, and whisper it. We're going to be talking about SEO. It's okay, don't run away screaming. If you're a fiction writer, chances are the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about search engine optimization. It's grim just hearing that term, isn't it? But this is the unexpected benefit of the non-fiction stuff that I've been writing. I've ended up getting a lot of readers from Google and other search engines, largely thanks to the non-fiction pieces. This wasn't really planned, but it does make complete sense in retrospect. The reality of how search engines work is that nobody really uses them to find new or unknown fiction. You can't really search for that by definition because nobody really knows about it yet. You might search for a book that is new to you, but it's still going to be known in some capacity if it's showing up in searches. Like top 10 lists, award winners, that kind of thing. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would be searching for Tales from the Triverse by Simon K. Jones. And if they were searching for that, then they already know about me. But if they were searching, let's say, for portal fiction, then they'd still find a lot of other stuff before getting anywhere near what I do. The non-fiction articles I write are at the opposite end of the spectrum. They often provide guides or how-tos to common questions. That makes them ideal for showing up in search results. As such, this newsletter frequently pops up when people are searching on Google for anything about serial fiction, writing fiction on Substack, and that kind of thing. Again, mixing up your newsletter to include more than just your fiction can really help. As long as there's some kind of logical connection from the non-fiction to the fiction, you're still going to get some cross-pollination of audiences. Okay, thanks for listening. Next week I'm going to carry on with this, digging into further topics, such as getting the free/paid model right, which took me a while. Audiences, how to think about them, keeping it simple, which is all about making sure your posts have a focus. Ideal post length, and then networking and community, which is a whole other thing, but I'll touch upon that next time. In the meantime, I do recommend digging out John Ward's podcast series, and specifically the episode with Scoot, which kind of covers adjacent territory to this and probably inspired me to start putting these thoughts down in the first place. Definitely worth listening to Scoot's own ideas about how his newsletter grew and the trajectory and the little journey it's gone on. Okay, that's it for today. You can leave comments and find some more little bits and pieces over on the newsletter version at simonkjones.substack.com. But for now, me and my strangely croaky voice, I'm going to leave you until next time. Thanks for listening.